Hello everyone, welcome to part 1 of Young Adult Materials, SLIS 757. This is the week of October 1st, and we're going to be looking at nonfiction and sports books this week. There is a ton of information, so that's why I split it into 2 lectures. I don't actually enjoy doing these that much. I mean, I like talking about this stuff, but it's a little weird talking to a computer for 2 hours. Anyway, Young Adult Materials, here we go. Lots of stuff this week. Learning outcomes in this class, you'll be able to learn about nonfiction and informational books for young adults, and also learn how to select them, find really good sources and review sources, learn about biographies and autobiographies for young adults, and learn about sports books for young adults, fiction and nonfiction. According to Waddle in 1991, and according to my own experience as a librarian, young adults who want to know about this world, planet, society don't care to continually extrapolate their information from fiction. They want to examine more reliable sources. Only nonfiction meets this need. Or according to Carter and Abrahamson, the intent of nonfiction books is to provide true and accurate information, but to many young adults, it also brings reading pleasure. So I'm going to split some hairs here and talk about nonfiction versus information books. Informational books is a term used as section labels in libraries. It narrows the view of nonfiction. It may have contributed to views that nonfiction is non-literary and not creative. In fact, nonfiction can be very entertaining and enjoyable. Also, if you're going to end up working in a school, you'll want to know that the Common Core state standards have been adopted in most states. There's an emphasis on curriculum containing literary nonfiction and informational texts, which means they're not pushing the fiction as much anymore, and they're really using a lot of nonfiction in the classroom to improve, theoretically, to improve reading scores. This is our chance, y'all. This is our chance for librarians to seize an opportunity to promote outstanding nonfiction. Now, I am a complete fiction fan. I love fiction, but it's also an opportunity for us to promote that very expensive part of our collections. So we want to support that Common Core state standard while it's still in place and make sure we're promoting those nonfiction books that are so awesome. So a little history of YA nonfiction. In the 1820s, beginnings were utilitarian, teaching kids how to do things, or teaching young people how to do things, or didactic, what a surprise. In the 1950s, expansion of children's literature, Random House, landmark books, focused on history and biographies. In 1958, Sputnik and the space race, the National Defense Education Act, put lots of money into library funds for science and math books so that we could make sure our children were well educated in science and beat the Russians to space. Some of the first YA nonfiction authors include Asimov, Branley, Selsam, and Zim. History continued in the 1960s. The boom continued. The ESEA Act, that is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, provided more federal money for library books. That was Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty. So the idea was that improving education would decrease poverty. I don't know that that has worked exactly, but certainly an honorable idea. New series of information books came out on all topics. The Vietnam War federal funding caused the federal funding to run a little bit dry. In the mid-70s, visual content and the birth of the photo essay made for some photojournalism or photography books. In the 1980s, there was a steady comeback of YA fiction. The new generation of writers included Asherbranner, Maestro, Patton, Meltzer, and Fritz. A breakout title for YA nonfiction includes Lincoln, a Photobiography. That was published in '87. That's by Russell Friedman. You'll hear his name again. For the first time in 32 years, a nonfiction book won the Newbery. Engaging text, impeccably researched visual content came together in an artistically seamless whole. That's a Michael Cart quote. You might recognize that name. He's the author of our textbook. And a new kind of informational book was born. I definitely want to bring your attention to Dorling Kindersley books, the eyewitness books, also known as DK Publishing. In 1980s, this British publisher started published in the US. They are revolutionary for the field of nonfiction. The formatting, the combining text and pictures to communicate information in new ways with sidebars, boxed information, pictures, maps, and diagrams. These books are just so fun to browse. Obviously, you can read them from cover to cover. I hope you've seen some of these DK books. They are just very engaging for students and for adults. Through the picture, I see reality. Through the word, I understand it. That's a quote from Kindersley. Some awards for nonfiction books are the Boston Globe Horn Book Award for Nonfiction. That was established in '76. The 2018 winner is Photographic, The Life of Graciela Iturbide. I keep on wanting to say that as turpitude, sorry. That's by Isabel Quintero, and that's a graphic novel biography about the photographer Graciela Iturbide. It's supposed to be excellent. I have not had my paws on this one yet. It's described as lyrical and gorgeous, and I am very intrigued. Just an FYI, 57 Bus was on the honored list, so it's got a Hornbook honor this year. I know that's come up on lists, or people have mentioned that on our discussion board. The Robert F. Siebert Medal, that was established in 2000. This year's winner was 12 Days in May, Freedom Ride 1961. That was written by Larry Dane Brimner. And the YALSA Award for Excellence in Nonfiction for Young Adults. The 2018 winner is Vincent and Theo, the Van Gogh brothers. That was written by Deborah Heiligman. That is on our required suggested reading list. That's one of your choices. You can certainly read something else, but it would be a really good one to pick, obviously, as it's an award winner. So let's talk about collection development and issues with nonfiction. I think in the past, according to Nilsson and Donaldson in 2009, fiction usually gets the lion's share of attention, nonfiction gets the lion's share of the budget. Nonfiction is expensive. I usually focus on a couple of Dewey ranges every year, so like I'll say, oh, my 300s look kind of old, and I'll purchase a bunch of 300s, and then I'll check what other area is looking old and purchase in that Dewey area. That's how I try to divide it up. Half the library collection bookshelves are informational books. Chance 2008. Say probably a little bit more than half of my library collection. It is about half, but I will say the part that gets used obviously is the fiction, much more. I need to sort of refocus or figure out what I want to do with the nonfiction, and it's going to be an ongoing debate. So nonfiction remains the kitchen-bound Cinderella of young adult literature, while the stepsister fiction remains the belle of the ball. That's according to Cart. The general award lists do not always contain nonfiction titles. I will tell you, when I was on the South Carolina Young Adult Book Award, we definitely tried to include a couple of nonfiction titles. So that was definitely a focus on that book award committee. At least it was several years ago. Why is nonfiction so underrated? Teens and some teachers and some librarians equate nonfiction with textbooks. Curriculum-driven series come from the publishers, so they're not quite as appealing. There is some reluctance or hesitancy of librarians and teachers to recommend titles outside of their field. So I was an English major, so I'm not quite as comfortable recommending science books or history books. Also, they're not typically on those YA award lists, which depends on the interests of some of the people on those committees, and the hesitancy or reluctance of committee members to evaluate something outside of their field. So, results from 22 research studies. This is a review of literature by Carter and Abrahamson in 1990. Interest in reading nonfiction occurs around the 4th grade and continues. Interest in reading nonfiction crosses ability levels, so your lower level readers might be more interested in reading nonfiction than fiction. Nonfiction makes up a larger percentage of boys reading than girls reading. Remedial readers prefer nonfiction and read primarily to read new things. Students for reading nonfiction are often unrelated to curriculum. Just an anecdote, my library assistant raised a young man who is a hunter and fisher, and she's like, you don't have any hunting and fishing books, you need to get them. I am not a hunting and fishing type. I bought some hunting and fishing books. They get checked out all the time. I did not realize that my school had some hunt and fishing type boys. So she was spot on, and I'm glad I bought them. I go on with the slide. I just said hunting and fishing type boys. It's been my experience that it is boys who hunt and fish. I know anybody can hunt and fish, just FYI. All right, so teens rank nonfiction subjects. Teen Reading Habits Survey, this is from 2007. They like poetry. That doesn't surprise me at all. I have some avid poetry readers. History, art, architecture, music, and movies. Lots of music, biographies, and memoirs. Those seem to be quite popular in my library. Food, exercise, and cooking. I only have adults check those out at my library. That doesn't mean anything. I have a strange microcosm. How-to books, how to fix things, how to do hair, how to knit or crochet, how to do crafts. I do have kids check those out. Science and technology, spirituality, religion and magic, other countries and cultures. Wraps up that list. So, how do you evaluate YA nonfiction? Topics of interest. Well, we just went through that list. The previous slide has a nice list of topics that they enjoy. They should be accurate. That goes without saying. Well researched with adequate documentation. Well organized with index glossaries, front matter, back matter to help out the reader. Design, illustrations add interest and clarity. You should see some of those DK publisher books. They're awesome. The following should be consistent and appropriate for YA audience. The setting and scope, theme, tone, style, and vocabulary. I think you can be pretty flexible on vocabulary. They can look things up or get things from context, but obviously you don't want highly scientific text that kids can't understand. Some great places to look for ideas for nonfiction. You can go to the Inc. Facebook page, Interesting Nonfiction for Kids, or the Inc. Think Tank Nonfiction Authors in your classroom. So a way to implement or use some of the books recommended on the Inc. page in your classroom to teach things. So there are lots of recommendations and frequent postings on this webpage or on this Facebook page. Review sources for evaluating nonfiction. Continued. Review sources, professional titles by H.W. Wilson, The Core Collections, definitely look there. Libraries Unlimited and others. Library journals, book list, Bulletin for the Center for Children's Books, Hornbook, School Library Connection, School Library Journal, and Voya. Keep in mind, these are all great places for reviews. We'll talk about this in a little bit. Review sources for evaluating YA nonfiction. Educational journals, the Allen Review, the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literature, Science Books and Films Journal, and Voices from the Middle. These are great review sources to find nonfiction to support curriculum or to support the students in your community. You can check with professional associations, the National Council for Social Studies and the National Science Teachers Association. This is, of course, a list that provides you with great resources for evaluating YA nonfiction, but in real life, you are going to have to do this fast, at least in my experience at my job. Because I manage 1,500 laptops in addition to managing a 6,000 square foot library, I very often ask my book jobber, happens to be Follett, to prepare a list for me, and then I go through the list and look for reviews. That works for me because starting from scratch is a little daunting. It depends on how much time your jobs allow you to do evaluation. I wish I had time to sit and read most of these things. I do read Voya. I do read Booklist. But after that, I run out of time. There's just not enough time in the day given my expanding work duties. So when you get on your real job, do your best and be as efficient as possible because you don't have time to read all this stuff, but try. Okay, fair enough. And in an attempt to save you a little bit of time, here's a selective list of award-winning YA nonfiction authors. Mark Aronson wrote about Sir Walter Raleigh and the Quest for El Dorado, Robert F. Kennedy, Crusader, and Trapped. Candace Fleming, The Great and Only Barnum, The Tremendous, Stupendous Life of Showman P.T. Barnum, and other books. Russell Friedman, already mentioned him. He wrote Lincoln, Immigrant Kids, and Freedom Walkers. James Cross Giblin, Good Brother, Bad Brother, the story of Edwin Booth and John Wilkes Booth, and Lindbergh, A Human Hero. Milton Meltzer, Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? The Jewish Americans, A History in Their Own Words. Jim Murphy, An American Plague, the true and terrifying story of the yellow fever epidemic of 1793, and he wrote The Great Fire. Catherine Reef is another one. She wrote Hemingway, A Writer's Life, and a book about E.E. Cummings. Another good name to know is Susan Campbell Bartoletti. She wrote They Called Themselves the KKK, Hitler Youth, Growing Up in Hitler's Shadow. I know I've seen that circulate at my library. And her latest novel, The Terrible Typhoid Mary, A True Story of the Deadliest Cook in America. That came out in spring of 2015. I have book talked that book. It has circulated several times in my library. It's described as insightful, impeccable scholarship that reads like a crime novel. And that review was read aloud at the ALA Houghton Mifflin dinner. A quote from Russell Friedman, who wrote the book Lincoln. I believe that a book of history or biography can carry within its pages a certain magical power. It can convey all of the life and immediacy of great fiction while retaining the authenticity and the additional power of truth. You might also check out the Read, Write, Think podcasts. There are a couple of podcasts that can help you choose nonfiction books for teens. Episode 16 is one. Some things in that episode include Almost Astronauts, 13 Women Who Dared to Dream, Years of Dust, The Story of the Dust Bowl, Charles and Emma, The Darwin's Leap of Faith, No Choir Boy, Murder, Violence, and Teenagers on the Death Row. I have seen that circulate at my library. Kids are always interested in criminals. How Does It Feel to Be a Problem, Being Young and Arab in America by Mustafa Bayoumi. You might also check out episode 37. These links are hot. I double checked to make sure they work. That is also a nonfiction roundup for more information and more recommendations. More sources from Read, Write, Think. Other resources for nonfiction include the Timelines and Texts Motivating Students to Read Nonfiction. It is a lesson plan for grades 6 through 8. It has, I think, 5 lessons in it at 45 minutes apiece. So it's a way to get if you are scrambling for lesson plans or scrambling for some way to collaborate with the teacher and you're in a middle school or even a high school, you could probably stretch it to 9th grade. This might be helpful to you. And also you might try the podcast on Read, Write, Think called A Conversation with Candace Fleming. So this is a topic with which I struggle, reference books and collections. Because of the increased use of technology, reference books are getting used less and less. Though I will tell you my reference collection has been underutilized for a while. That is in part my fault. It has been worse in the past 3 years because my school went 1-to-1, which was a problem in multiple ways. One, that I had to manage all of the laptops, and 2, that because all the students had laptops, library use dropped off greatly. And then I had difficulty responding to the fact that library use dropped off greatly because I was managing laptops. So catch-22. Anyway, it creates a problem, though I have just started to have teachers, strangely, in the past week and a half, like, can you pull books for me? Can I have a bunch of books on this, or this? So it's been great. Moving to online databases for encyclopedias, dictionaries, and almanacs, Bartlett's quotes and all that stuff means I don't really need to have them, except, like I said, every once in a while I get a little spurt of people who want to use them. That said, electronic resources serve more teens because it offers 24/7 access, and now all of our kids have laptops, though they do not have guaranteed access to the internet. So that is problematic, quite problematic. So there is definitely a debate. Do we still need reference books in print? I think back in 2007, I got in an argument, not a nasty one, just a debate with my principal. She did not want me to buy encyclopedias, and I said, well, the encyclopedias don't crash or go down. And then 2 days later, our internet was out for a week and a half, and she came back and said, why don't you buy some encyclopedias? So, but I haven't purchased encyclopedias since 2008, I think. That's the last time I bought any, and I don't think anybody publishes them. They're hard to find. Though I might buy one more set because it is really nice when the web goes down to have it. One thing you can do in pairing nonfiction and fiction, you could have kids read about the Titanic in A Night to Remember, and then SOS Titanic by E. Bunting. So you would have a fiction and a nonfiction title. You could have kids studying the civil rights read the March Trilogy by John Lewis, which is a graphic novel set, which I know we've mentioned before, but you ought to peek at those. They're excellent. And then they could read One Crazy Summer by Williams Garcia. I do a unit with my health teachers about mental health, where we read young adult books about mental health and then do research online about mental health issues. Similar theme. Some other sources for nonfiction, Voya's nonfiction honor lists, and you can also check out Booklist online. There's something called Series Nonfiction Watch. So if you have part of a series, it'll help you keep track of the rest of the series so that you can buy them if they're books that are popular in your library. All right, that's it for this part of the lecture. Please look for part 2 of this week's lecture tomorrow evening, probably pretty late. I will try to get it up as fast as I can, but it probably won't be till about midnight. All right, thanks. Bye.